Hello everyone, I am Jonathan Little, and today we're going to be going through some hands that one of my poker coaching students, James, played in a $600 buy-in tournament that I bought him into because he won backing through pokercoaching.com. Each month we've been giving away a few seats to tournaments with buy-ins about $500 to $1,000. James was one of the backing winners, and he decided to send in some of the hands that he played. So I'm going to take a look at them. I have not looked through these hands at all, so you're going to get my real-time feedback as if I was playing the hands, and it's kind of like you're going to listen to me play some hands. So let's get to it. Also, if you are a poker coaching member and you want to get backing, click the link below. There should be information below on how you can submit your application to have me buy you into live poker tournaments. I have full faith in my students, and I want to get my money in action and give them a great experience at the same time. So if you want me to buy you into poker tournaments, check out the link below. All right, so let's take a look. We are playing 200 big blinds deep at Foxwoods in a $600 tournament. We have a limp under the gun. I would make it 500 or 600 in this scenario. I think if you raise much bigger than that, you're going to start to get just a whole lot of folds. But at least in my experience playing $500-ish buy-in tournaments, a lot of people will call a pot size raise, or maybe even a tiny bit more, but the very wide range. So I like making it about 600. James makes it 400, and I think if we were shallower stacked, this would be ideal. But given we are so deep stacked, you just want to build a pot and you want to extract full value with an effective nut hand. You get two callers. And notice right here, the pot could just be 600 chips bigger, which would allow you to make a bigger flop continuation bet, right? All right, flop comes 8-5-2. Small blind leads for 600. Well, this is one of these spots where small blind's range could be all over the place. It may be exactly sets, it may be exactly draws, it may be exactly marginal made hands, it may be some mix of those. But in general, I think given that there are just way more draws and way more marginal made hands than there are sets and two pairs, I think I like a raise to maybe 2,000, about 3 times the opponent's bet, given the opponent bet relatively large. If the opponent bet like 200 on the flop, I'd raise to more like 1,600. But when he makes a reasonable bet, I think a raise to about 2,000 is pretty nice. James goes 1,500, and I think that is just a little bit small because think about it, right? If the opponent has 9-7 for a gut shot, 9-7 to clubs, that's a hand that's going to be getting pretty much the right odds plus implied odds to call. He has to put in 900 more into a pot that's going to go up to 4,000. So right now he's immediately getting 4-to-1 pot odds, or 3-to-1 pot odds. So he really only needs to get another 5,000 or 6,000 chips to go in the pot to break even. And whenever he makes the straight, he probably can. Also, he could just have a better draw, like 7-6 or 5 or 4-3 that's getting great odds. And if he has a hand like Ace-8, King-8, Queen-8, Jack-8, that's going to call 2,000 as well, right? So I think a 2,000 raise just extracts more value. So far, I think James has used slightly too small of bet sizes. Turns to Jack of Clubs, which is a very nice card because only Jack-8 gets there, really. Small blind checks, I would just keep betting. I would bet something like 2,800, 3,000 just to extract value. James does basically that, which I think is nice. Gets called. River is an ace now in small blind checks. So James almost certainly had the best hand on the flop on the turn. The question is, can we extract value now? Well, if the opponent has an 8, will they call any bet? And I think the answer is probably no, unless we go really small, like 1,000 or 2,000. But then we run the risk of getting check raised every once in a while, perhaps all in by a busted draw, which I don't think we want. So I think this is a scenario where it's probably just ideal to check it back. Unless you think the opponent's just an extreme calling station. But given we are early in the tournament, I don't see why we would have that read. So I like a check behind, I think. James does check, and we just win. Be nice to know what the opponent had, but I guess we don't. 100, 100 still. 400, call, call, call. I would just fold Jack 3 offsuit. This is a scenario where, yes, we're closing the action. Yes, we're getting good odds. The problem, though, is that, like, what are we looking for on the flop? Even if it comes King Jack 3, we can't just blast our money in because we easily could be against a good draw, or we could be against King Jack, or Kings, or Jacks, or 3s, right? So you have to be very cautious in this spot. If we were against a min raise and a call and a call and a call and a call, I would call. But I think this is just a fold. I don't think there's any merit in turning this hand into a bluff either. It's just pretty bad. So I would have folded this hand. Right here, if James made it I don't know, 4,000. I actually don't think that would be insane, and it might be a very strong play, but it's just not necessary. I'd rather use something like Jack 3 suited as a bluff as opposed to just Jack 3 offsuit, which is legitimately terrible. So don't feel like you have to defend in these spots. You're just not getting great odds. Again, if it was against a min raise, you're getting better odds, but we're against a 4 big blind raise, so just fold. Jack 3-2, I would definitely check. If it goes bet call, I would fold. If it goes bet raise, I would fold. If there's one bet, probably going to stick around. Facing bet call, I would just fold. It's very likely we have the best hand at the moment, but there are a lot of bad turns and rivers. Any king, queen, ace is terrible. Also, even a hand like pocket ace could randomly get there with an 8 when an 8 comes and would keep putting money in. So the overcards may or may not be bad, but we can't continue on them. And the lower cards appear good, but they may not be, right? Also, we could just be beat by a jack at the moment. So I like to fold. James sticks around though, turns a 2, which again may look like a nice card, but now like ace 2 gets there, right? Facing a 2K bet, I would just fold again. So I would have folded much earlier in this hand. Check on the river, and great example, right? So this is exactly why I said I would just fold on the flop, because yes, we could be against a draw sometimes, and that's fine, but really, what draws are there? Ace 5, Ace 3, 5-3 suited. And it's just so easy to be beat when someone is betting into multiple players. So I like to fold there just on the flop. Well, pre-flop first, right? Knows we were dominated pre-flop. On the flop, we were dominated and would have folded. On the turn, I would have folded. And then on the river, I would have folded to a bet again. So that's a good example of why you just don't want to be playing the Jack 3 offsuit. Or even like Jack 6 offsuit there. Jack 7, I'd probably... Jack 7's even close. Jack 8 I would have called pre-flop. But you have to be very careful with big card, little card. It's just not a good hand. All right, 100, 200 facing a raise. Call. You can either 3-bet or call. I would probably just go ahead and 3-bet this hand as a solid blocker bluff. You usually want to make about a pot size raise in this scenario. Pot size raise is 3 times the last bet. So 3 times 7 is 21, plus any additional money in the pot. So 21 plus 23-ish. So that is 4,300 or so. I know that seems like a big bet. A lot of people think, oh, 4,300, that's huge. But really, it's just a pot size bet. So 3 times the last bet, which would be 2,100, plus another 21 here, plus call it 300 or 400 from here, depending on what the ante is. We see a big blind ante of 200, right? So about 4,300 or so. James decides to call. Look, I don't have a problem with calling, but I think in this scenario, if you 3-bet and get jammed on, you can easily fold, even getting okay pot odds. If you think you're getting close to having to call it off based on getting too good of pot odds, you can make it a little bit less, like 3,500. Then if you face a 20K shove, you can fold. But I think I would have 3-bet this pre-flop. If this was suited, I might be more inclined to flat call because it's just going to flop better multi-way. But top pair, multi-way is usually fine, but certainly not a nut hand. So you don't really care if people fold pre-flop, and if they do call, you can proceed from there. All right, we flop a gut shot. I would just check. I would not put any money in here. Facing a 1K small bet and a call and a call. Guess I'd call, right? Now we have to put in 1,000 to try to win 9,000. Getting pretty great immediate odds. We have the straight, which is very live. The straight draw, which is very live. Backdoor diamonds may be fine. The problem with the backdoor diamond, like say turns to 2 of diamonds, is if we face a bet, again, we're not getting great odds, and we're probably not going to get paid on the river. So I get we have backdoor diamonds, but it's not quite as good as it may appear because we're going to have a tough time getting paid when we get there. But I would have called here. Turns a 5, I would just check fold now unless it's against another tiny bet. River's a jack, facing 5,500 bet. I would just fold. We're going to be beat here a lot of the time. It's very, very easy to be against a draw that got there, like 10-9 of diamonds, ace 10 that decided to float like you did, jack 10, queen 10, right? All those or jack 10 would bet, queen 10 probably wouldn't, but a king would bet. We beat jack 10 anyway. What am I saying? The 2 pairs is what I'm trying to say here. Queen jack, there we go. Queen jack, king jack, those would bet. So I like a fold here. And that's a fine hand. If you did 3-bet that hand pre-flop, I'd probably make a small bet on the flop against one person and then go from there and probably just end up checking down the turn in the river. All right, we raise to 700. I typically use a bigger raise size when we're playing very deep. We are playing 66-ish big blinds deep, so I think raising to about 800, 900 is fine. But whatever, 700 is fine. It doesn't make that big of a difference. Big blind 3-bets, I would just call against the loose aggressive player in position with the suited connector. Hand's great. Opponent bets the flop. We have a pair and a draw. I would call. Some people think they always need to raise with their pairs and draws, but the problem is that if you raise here, what's going to fold? Well, under pairs are going to fold, which you crush. Maybe hands like ace-king would fold, which, you don't really mind if ace-king folds, but that's it. Ace-king, king-queen, and ace-queen would fold. But besides that, a lot of the hands that would fold, you demolish. And also, you kind of know which cards are bad for you, right? Like an ace is obviously bad, a king is obviously bad. Every other card's kind of okay. I mean, I get that a queen makes ace-king the straight, but such is life. And the thing is, no better hands fold, right? Like ace-10 probably isn't going to fold. King-10 probably isn't going to fold. Queen-10 probably isn't going to fold. A jack's not going to fold. Overpair's not going to fold. So there's really no point in raising. Raising, for the most part, makes your opponent play well. And we're against a lag. We just randomly have 3 outs, right? With like ace-x. Turns a 9, which you didn't really want. Opponent bets 5k. Well, I would call here and then look to fold the river. I would also call here with a queen. So my range is going to be decently well protected here. It's going to be something like 2 pair and better. Maybe something like king, jack, and better. Maybe king 10 and better for a gut shot, right? I'd also call some diamond draws if I had them. Probably don't have a ton of diamond draws unless it's like jack x of diamonds or 8x of diamonds. So I like a call here and then just fold to a river bet. River's a 9. That's nice. Opponent bets, I would jam. Or opponent checks, I would jam. I think your opponent's going to have a lot of queens and just a whole lot of garbage. And if your opponent has garbage, he's going to fold to any bet. If he has a queen, he's going to call any bet, presumably. If you thought your opponent was just done with the hand, like obviously done, instead of shoving, I would bet something like 2,000 to try to make it look like I'm trying to get some thin value bet through or maybe some weird bluff to potentially get the opponent to jam over the top of me. But if the opponent looks like they are checking to try to induce a bluff, well, then clearly you just want to jam and get all the money in. So either I bet very tiny here to try to induce a bluff or all in just if I expect to get called a lot. So you do get called and you win, which is great. It's a well-played hand. If your opponent bet the river, by the way, on a non-9 or 10, I would have folded. So just be aware of that. It's perfectly fine to call a turn bet with the idea that you're going to fold to the river bet as long as your range is well protected. And you want to always ask yourself in that spot, if I call a turn bet with this hand, what other hands do I need to call with to make sure I'm just not folding everything to a river bet? Because imagine if you only call with 2 pair there on the turn or draws and you fold all of it to a river bet, you're really exploitable. So make sure you call your queens as well. And when you do have a queen there, don't just think, what should I do with my queen? Think, how would I play the rest of my range? Assuming you're trying to play against, play a balanced strategy against reasonable opponents. Of course, if you think your opponents are not very good and you can be well out of line, maybe it just makes sense to jam with a queen there to get full value from 2 pair that'll call it off, although clearly that won't happen very often. All right. 500 to 1,000, facing a 3,300 raise from a 40k stack, and then an old man jams 8,300. So here, what does old man mean? Right? Some players who are old men will have only the nuts here, like 9s are better and ace queen and better, maybe king queen. Some old men will have all sorts of stuff. So here's a spot where you can either call or jam or fold, depending on the scenario. Also, what do we think about the initial raiser? I see they're labeled as a lag here. So I would not expect them to have too many nut hands. So I'm probably going to play this hand. If I expected under the gun to be tight, I would strongly consider just folding. So what you want to ask in this scenario, if I call, am I giving the initial raiser great odds to call? And is that a problem? And here it is a problem because your opponent's going to be in position, closing the action, having to put in 5,000 to win 30,000 or something like that, 25,000. So they're really not making a mistake by calling. So for that reason, we want to re-raise. And then you want to ask, if I re-raise, can I fold to a jam? Or are there any hands in my range that I would like to fold to a jam? So if you re-raise here, it's going to be to 13k if we min re-raise. Typically, that is the size you're going to want to use in these scenarios, if that is what you want to do. So if I make it 13k, can I fold for another 23k into a pot that's going to be like 80,000? And the answer is just no, right? So for that reason, if we are going to continue in this spot, we either need to... Well, we probably just need to shove, is what it amounts to, because calling is not great, min re-raising is not great, so shoving is probably the only option in this exact scenario, given the stack sizes. You always want to go through all of your options to see if any of them are particularly great, particularly bad. Shoving can make the lag fold out lower pairs, which is great. It can make the lag fold out stuff like king-jack suited, which is great, because all those hands have plenty of equity. So James likes to call, and I think this is not great because we just now let the lag call in position, and that's not so good. If also the lag jams, what do we do? Now we're not quite getting the right odds to call, but how do we expect the lag to play? I don't know. Flag does call, as we see, not great. Check, opponent bets, I would fold. And notice here, if we jammed, we would have just gotten it all in flipping and gotten to realize our equity. Now, we end up... Well, what's probably going to happen is if we get an ace or a queen on the flop, the opponent's going to get off the hook. And if we miss, we end up losing the pot a lot. So this is not such a great outcome for us, right? I mean, I understand that we avoided a flip. But for all we know, maybe the opponent folds pocket jacks pre-flop. I mean, think about it, right? Put yourself in this guy's shoes. It goes raise, jam, all in for 50 big blinds. You call it off with jacks? I mean, it's very close. You certainly don't love it, especially if James has been reasonable. So anyway, they get it all in. We don't know how it ends up, but it doesn't really matter. All right, raise to 2.5 big blinds with jacks, which is fine. Get 3-bet by a kid. I would just be all in every time. This is a spot where the kid can be 3-betting a decent amount. Obviously, the 8K 3-bet's a little bit small, but the opponent is somewhat shallow to begin with, so their 3-betting sizes should be smaller in general. So I'm cool just jamming here. Jacks is great. You could also call in position if you think the opponent's really wide. But even if the opponent's really wide, they're often going to have stuff like king, queen, and ace X, and just like stuff that has equity, right? And you don't really care if your opponent folds out equity. Plus, jacks is going to end up folding a little bit poorly post-flop. Like, say it does come king, queen, blank, and the opponent has ace 5 and they bet. You just fold, and your opponent gets the bluff through, right? Anyway, we call. Here's a great example. I would just check the flop. I would check behind on the turn, because if you bet the turn and the opponent calls or jams, you're unhappy. And if it just checks down, you're going to end up winning a lot. Maybe you're thinking you can make a hand like kings fold, but I'm not trying to bluff people off kings. Also, the opponent could just be checking with ace X to try to induce a bluff, realizing that if he bets and gets called, he's pretty unhappy. So I don't think you want to bet here, because when your opponent folds, they're usually going to be folding out pretty perfectly, unless they have exactly kings or queens. Even then, kings or queens may not fold to a 10K bet. So here I think you have a pretty clear marginal made hand. I get the idea of betting so that you don't face a river bet. But, like, I don't know what a kid means here. If the kid might just jam you all in with some random junk like king, queen, thinking that you're making some thin protection bet or something like that, then clearly this is awful to bet and then fold to a jam. So I think I would just check it down and be content with that. In general, when you have a marginal made hand that can win if it checks down, you want to just be checking it down. Obviously, you'd rather bet with a hand like jacks, I think, than kings here, because Kings isn't so worried about getting outdrawn on the river, where jacks kind of is, because a king or a queen could be pretty bad. But I don't think it really matters. All those hands just want to check. Just check and get to the showdown. You're going to win a decent amount of the time, and nobody's folding an ace, right? So when people fold here, they're folding out usually unpaired hands that you crush, and low pairs like pocket sevens that isn't going to put money in anyway. So I think you'd rather just check. All right, 50 big blinds facing a limp, 3 big blind raise. I'd probably just flat. If you get re-raised here, you can fold. Pretty awful flop for you. Should we bet as a bluff if they check to us? This board should line up okay with your range. It should also line up with the weak passive player's range to some extent, though. I think if you want to bluff here, the obvious draws make sense, like Jack 10, Queen 10, Queen Jack suited if you have them. If you have a random hand like Ace 7 suited, Ace 6 suited, sure, bluff those. So I don't know if we necessarily need to bluff the Ace Jack. If you had a hand like King Queen of Clubs, I would bluff that. But I don't think Ace Jack needs to bluff. But if you did bluff, I think it's acceptable. Turns a 10. Check, check. Again, same story. Do we need to bluff this? The problem is on this board, your opponents, if they're good, they should be doing a decent amount of checking with their marginal made hands looking to check call. So I think if you bet the turn in this scenario, you need to be willing to bluff the river. So again, the question is, do we have better hands we'd like to bluff here? Well, King Queen's an obvious one. King Jack's an obvious one. If we had Ace 7 or Ace 6, I have to think we would just bet the flop. So maybe we don't have very many better bluffs, right? I mean, we don't have like Jack 4 pre-flop, so maybe this is just the hand we want to use. Ace Jack, King Jack, and King Queen as our bluffs? Maybe. Also, do you want to have any bluffs? If you're playing live poker in a $600 tournament, you can often look and tell if your opponents are paying attention, if they're going to stick around in this pot. And if they are going to stick around in this pot, then don't bluff. And if they're one of the two players is clearly folding and the other one's just acting normally, maybe you should go for it. So we do go for an 8,000 bluff into the 24,000 pot. So whenever you use a small size like this, you definitely want to make sure you're betting the river. And given how I just kind of went through the range, we don't really have very many obvious bluffs. I generally like a small sizing. We do get called, and like I said, we need to be bluffing the river. Opponent checks river, pot's 40K. We have 80K behind. From a GTO point of view, we could just shove. Problem is that every once in a while we're just going to get snapped off by 2 pair or something like that. Or king queen that decide to make a weird check call. Or king jack. But yeah, we're going to be against a lot of marginal made hands here in general. So the question is, how much will your opponent call with a marginal made hand, and at what point do they start folding? And I think a bet of like 30k is probably fine. You definitely don't want to bet small, like 15k, because if you bet 15k, then random hands like a 10x or a 9x will call you. But I think a bet of 30 or maybe 35k is pretty good. Maybe 35k is ideal here. Check, check. I do not like check, check. Unless you can just tell your opponent's never folding, right? Like if your opponent looks pumped up whenever they get the king on the river, then clearly don't bluff. But I think this is a spot where you need to bluff. You have basically no showdown value. And when you have no showdown value, you need to bluff. Notice here that if your turn bluffs are literally king, queen, king, jack, and ace, jack, they all got there on the river, right? So you get to bet the river with a lot of hands. If you had queen, jack, you'd keep betting. If you had 2 pair, you'd keep betting. So this really is one of the worst hands in your range at this point. So whenever you have one of the worst hands in your range, and you have a blocker to the nuts, right? We block the queen, jack. I think it's a mandatory bet. And given your range is so incredibly strong, that's why you don't need to go gigantic, like all in. And to be fair, if you're trying to be GTO in this spot, the ideal play could just be a small bet because, like I said, you have lots of nuts here. Anyway, check, check, opponent has a set. If you can look and tell the guy's not folding, obviously don't bet. But this seems like a spot where just your hand in general really, really, really needs to bet. All right, pocket 8's 38 big blinds. You open it up, which is fine. Get 3-bet by a calling station. All right, so what does this calling station mean to James? So if someone is a calling station, that means typically when they show aggression, when they 3-bet, they usually have a really good hand. So if they have a really good hand, we definitely don't want to jam, right? So the options are call or fold. We don't want to re-raise either, because if we re-raise, we're probably against a stronger than average range. Remember, calling stations call too often. That doesn't say anything about their re-raising strategy, but if they usually call too often, it means that they don't re-raise often enough, which means when they do re-raise, they probably have a really good hand. So we don't want to be re-raising. So can we call and just try to get a set? Well, we have to put in 10 to try to win 35. So not great pot odds immediately. Can we get an additional, we have to try to get in 10 to 1 implied odds, right? We need to be able to put in 10 here to win a total of 100 from the opponent, and we're getting barely that. So I actually don't mind folding here. I mean, you kind of hate the folding here, but either call or fold, whatever. What I'm saying is it's close. Oh, definitely not jam, though. Definitely not re-raise. You get a set, which is great. Check your opponent bets. I mean, you'd love to just get it in immediately. And if the opponent does have a strong range, I think you should just get it in immediately. Again, if you can tell the opponent looks kind of unhappy here, then definitely call. If the opponent looks like, yep, I have aces, definitely get it in. So either call or jam, either plays fine. You do jam, and you lose to queens. And as you see, the opponent did have a very strong hand pre-flop. And obviously, once you get a set, you're not folding. Which is why you want to make sure you have at least medium and big pairs, because it's always unfortunate when you get set over setted, and clearly low pairs get set over setted more than medium pairs, which get set over setted more than good pairs. So tough run for James right at the end, but in general, tips for James. You need to use bigger sizings across the board, I think. In the early levels, there were a few spots where you definitely used bets that were too small. There were a few spots where I thought you also could have potentially bluffed, but it turns out, like with the previous hand where you had the ace-jack on the river, kind of a mandatory bluffing hand, it would have epically failed. So maybe you had a good read to the point that you didn't do that. But all in all, these hands all seemed reasonable, right? There was nothing that was egregious, and whenever there's nothing that's egregious, that's solid. It means we backed a good player at pokercoaching.com. And again, if you are a Poker Coaching member, check out the links below to apply for us to give you money to go play poker. I have full faith in my students to get out there and turn my money into more money, and I want to give you all a great time. So that's going to be it for today. Thanks a lot. I hope you enjoyed it. Make sure you click like, subscribe, tell your friends that we are giving away free money to all of you. Keep up the good work, and I'll talk to you next time.